Right now, on this planet, there is only one species of human, which I am, and presumably you are. That is Homo sapiens, which is a Latin name. Homo is our genus, it means man, and sapiens is our species, it means wise. Our species has existed for just 300,000 years, which actually makes us pretty new in the grand scheme of history. We started off in East Africa and then gradually made our way out of the continent and spread across the world. However, we weren't walking into uninhabited lands that were just void of any other human beings. We weren't the only ones who were making stone tools and hunting down mammoths with spears, because it turns out there were many other species of humans. There were at least 5, or 8, or 12, depending on your source. But what we do know for a fact is that there was more than just us. But why is this important? Well, not only can we learn about the history of our own species through learning about our human relatives, but it also reminds us of a pretty simple truth. We're just animals. You are just an animal. It grounds you, because yeah, you are an exceptional animal, right? Because you can believe in a god, and you can help build pyramids, and you can play the harmonica, at least better than most other species. But in the end, you're just an animal who gets angry when it's hungry and is frightened of loud noises like a dog when it hears thunder. And as we'll get into, there's really no good reason why we are the only species of humans left. It wasn't like it was our destiny or anything. It's actually pretty much by luck that we're the only ones here and the rest of the humans are gone. So the only proper reply to the question, what does it mean to be human, is to say, well, what species of human are you talking about? I need you to clarify, because there are lots of different human species.
Hi, this is Caden from editing speaking here. I guess what I was trying to say there is you should say that if you want to sound like a douchebag. Yeah, that's it. Alright, enjoy the rest of the video.
Let's just start off with the most popular one. Homo Neanderthalensis. These are our closest relatives, and if I were to put you in a time machine and send you back 50,000 years ago, if you were to come across one of them, you'd probably just mistake them for a short, bulky version of us, with some really big nostrils. Their noses were particularly large, and that was to help them warm and humidify cold, dry air. Neanderthals were anywhere from 5 to 5.5 feet tall, with a muscular build that made them adept for the cold climates of which they inhabited. Neanderthals lived throughout Europe, and the first fossils discovered were located in the Neander Valley in Germany, hence the name, in the mid-1800s. Despite some physical differences, in many ways Neanderthals were just as sophisticated as our sapien ancestors. They made ornaments, crafted tools, made burial sites, and harnessed the use of fire and cooked their own food. We've also found bone needles and other tools necessary for crafting clothing out of animal hides. And considering that they lived in colder climates before we did, they were probably wearing clothing before us. Neanderthals sound pretty similar to early Homo sapiens, and there's actually a good chance that you have Neanderthal in your DNA. When international researchers decoded the Neanderthal genome in 2010, they discovered 2 things. A, that Neanderthal DNA is 99.7% identical to present-day human DNA, and B, that up to 2% of the DNA in the genome of present-day humans outside of Africa originated in Neanderthals, or in Neanderthals' ancestors. Now, it's totally fine to ask this question, because you might be wondering, if we found Neanderthal DNA in our DNA, and we know that they're their own species, does that mean at some point down the line, my ancestor had sex with a Neanderthal? And scientists would say that that's actually quite possible, that there was a point at which our species was capable of producing offspring with another species, which is just weird to think about. But it's also important to note that a lot of the similarities in our DNA with Neanderthals comes down to the fact that we have a common ancestor with them. I also just want to point out, and this was news to me while making this video, that around 50% of your genes, which is a small part of your DNA, the genes are what make up the DNA. It's not synonymous. I think that's a common misconception. But your genes, there's a match with every animal and plant species. Around 50% of your genes match every other animal and plant species on the face of this earth. From monkeys to bananas, like more than 50%. And it makes sense because we're all living things after all. Homoflorenziensis. This is one of the newly discovered species of human. It was found on the island of Flores in Indonesia in 2003. And what was incredibly striking about these guys was the fact that all the fossils that we found of them, all their skeletons, they're incredibly tiny. They average between 3 to 3.5 feet tall, all of them. And that's because Homo florenziensis underwent a process of dwarfing. They were trapped on this small Indonesian island due to rising sea levels, and because you're on this small island, there's only so many resources to go around, so much food, only the shortest ones survived because they needed less, and those were the ones that passed on their genes. So the species just got shorter. And what's amazing is that they weren't the only animals on the island that underwent that dwarfing process. So did the elephants that were trapped there too. We found their skeletons, these like dwarf elephants, which Homo florenziensis hunted. So it was literally like dwarfs hunting dwarfs on this dwarf island. But this is ridiculous. But Komodo dragons also live on this island. So all the other things got tinier, but there were just these giant lizards running around. And I cannot imagine that there was ever a scenario in which one of those like tiny little Florenziensis guys came across a Komodo dragon and it ever ended well. It had to have ended terribly. Because like, I think about me, right? I'm around 6 feet tall, you know, around 6 feet tall, maybe 5'11". And if I ran into a Komodo dragon, I would be screwed. I looked it up. They run at like 12 miles per hour. So I got here, 12 miles per hour. I might be able to outrun one with like enough adrenaline. I think I might be able to do that. But if I was only 3 feet tall, if I was half my height, I would be screwed if I ran into one of those things. I would be totally done for. So, you know, Homo florenziensis, that had to have been a tough existence. They were probably giant lizard food. Quite a lot. So yeah, next species. Homo erectus. Don't be childish. It's a pretty incredible species, and they lived throughout most of Africa and Asia for close to 2 million years, which means that, with our fossil evidence right now, they were the longest living species of human, ever. Many researchers have suggested that Homo erectus spread throughout most of Afro-Eurasia because they were scavengers who really liked meat. As bigger predators like saber-toothed cats moved throughout the continent, Homo erectus followed to pick off what they didn't eat. Also, these guys looked strikingly similar to us. They were around the same height with a similar build, but their brains were smaller than ours, and they had a low-hanging face with a defined brow line. And that defined brow line, which also can be found in Neanderthals, is called the brow ridge. And researchers are still trying to figure out like what it is, because it's clear that we don't have one. Like if you look at a skull comparison between us, Neanderthals, Homo erectus, like you see the bone there, you can see that brow ridge. It's not on our skull. And researchers are still debating like what it's for. But a lot have settled on the idea that it was allowing like those species that had it to create more facial expressions, which opened up more nonverbal communication. But anyways, enough talk about eyebrows. Homo erectus had us beat in terms of sophistication for a very long time. We've found evidence of tools that Homo erectus made that are 1.76 million years old, which means that these guys were making like tools, stone tools, 1 million years before our species even existed. That's nuts. That's insane. There's also evidence showing that they may have harnessed fire around 1 million years ago, as shown by ash and burnt bone fragments we found in caves where Homo erectus lived. All these species of human are incredible, and I could go on about them for a very long time, but the problem is that like we don't actually agree on how many species of humans there are. The debate among scientists is very similar to the "is a hot dog a sandwich" debate, because it just depends on your definition. There are scientists who argue that we need to like narrow down what we consider a species by the anatomy. If you look at the skeletal structure, depending on how that looks, that's how you should define what a species is, right? And there's others that are arguing that like, hey, right now, because we haven't fully like sequenced out the genomes to these different species of humans, it's impossible to distinguish between them, right? And there's actually a group of researchers who have argued that Homo erectus is in fact made up of several different species. So it's just hard for us to say how many there are, and the debate is going to keep on going until we find more solid evidence. But what we do know for a fact, what I do want to focus on, is the fact that we know we are the only ones left. Why is that? Well, the answer lies in us. Homo sapiens ended up being the nail in the coffin for most other human species, whether it was through direct conflict, triumph through adaptation, or possibly even a merger. I mean, there's a good chance that it was a mix of everything. But when our species left Africa 70,000 years ago, everywhere we went, the years were numbered for other humans. When we arrived in Northern Europe, we were able to hunt game down better than Neanderthals, and they disappeared. Same thing happened when we arrived in Asia to Homo erectus. Now they're all gone, so what made our species different? And it was just our ability to adapt. Just look at the Americas, right? When we arrived in the Americas, there were no other human species there. We went from the northernmost part of the continent, in Alaska, we crossed a land bridge, and we worked our way all the way down to the southernmost tip of Argentina in just 2,000 years. Our species traversed all those climates, passed down the equator in 2,000 years. No other species does that. We were able to do that. That's insane. All that quick adaptability came down to a change in our brains due to complete chance. Around 70,000 years ago, right when we were leaving Africa, there was a genetic mutation that allowed us to start communicating and thinking in new ways. And from that genetic mutation, we were able to start doing stuff that no other living thing on this planet ever has. We were able to start thinking and creating things in our heads that do not physically exist. Creating and believing in those things that do not physically exist was the roots of our culture and spirits. We started assigning importance to physical objects that had no objective benefit to our survival, the roots of trade, which no other human species did. These new beliefs in the make-believe provided new ways of organizing ourselves that in a matter of a few 10,000 years allowed us to cooperate by the thousands and eventually by the millions. All of that is what made it possible for us to adapt to pretty much anything. It was the strength in our bonds. And think about it. In close to 2 million years, Homo erectus was making tools and speaking in a pretty loose language and crafting fires in pretty much the same way for that entire time span. But with us, in the span of 10,000 years, we made thousands of unique languages, written, spoken, and digital, created whole belief systems that have united billions of people, religiously, philosophically, scientifically, and politically. And in the last 200 years, we made it possible to communicate with each other instantly when we're on other sides of the planet. We have put members of our species on the moon and discovered the fossil evidence that tells the human story, which I just described to you. And perhaps the hardest truth to accept is that it all happened completely by chance. But the fact that it even happened in the first place and that it continues to happen makes it the most beautiful and frightening story ever told. And realizing that you are capable of knowing that story, and that we can continue to tell that story, and that we might be the only species that ever will know that story, only reinforces that fact. Thank you so much for watching.